The smell of instant ramen and disappointment filled my cramped studio apartment in Queens as I stared at the eviction notice taped to my door. 24 years old and already failing at life. At least that's what my family would say if they knew. Actually, scratch that. They already thought I was a failure, and they made sure I knew it every chance they got. My phone buzzed with yet another text from my cousin Jessica. Hope you can still afford gas money for Mom's birthday party tomorrow. LOL. Maybe we should start a GoFundMe for you. I threw my phone onto the second-hand couch that doubled as my bed and rubbed my temples. The headache that had been building all day reached a crescendo as I looked around my tiny apartment. The paint was peeling, the radiator clanged like a broken drum, and the view from my single window was of a brick wall 3 feet away. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life would look after college, but tomorrow was Aunt Linda's 50th birthday party, and despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to skip it. She was my mom's sister, and even though my mom had passed away 3 years ago, Linda had always been kind to me, unlike the rest of the family. The next evening, I stood outside, the sprawling colonial house in Westchester, smoothing down my one decent dress. It was the same black dress I'd worn to every family gathering for the past 2 years, and I was pretty sure my cousins had started taking bets on whether I owned any other clothes. Well, look who actually showed up, came the familiar, grating voice of my cousin Mark as I stepped through the front door. He was holding a beer and wearing a smirk that made my stomach turn. I was just telling everyone about your little business venture. Still selling friendship bracelets on Etsy, Sarah? The room fell quiet, and I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. My Uncle Richard chuckled from his leather armchair, and my cousin Jessica snorted into her wine glass. Even some family friends I didn't recognize were staring, waiting for the show to begin. It's jewelry design, actually, I said quietly, hating how small my voice sounded. And it's more than just Etsy now. Oh, right, jewelry design, Mark air-quoted with his free hand. How fancy. Mom, didn't you say Sarah asked you for money last month? What was it for again? Rent? My face burned with humiliation. I had asked Aunt Linda for a small loan, $200 to cover my electricity bill. She'd said no, which was her right, but apparently she'd also shared that information with everyone. Leave her alone, Mark, came a voice from the kitchen doorway. My cousin David, Linda's youngest son, emerged with a plate of appetizers. He was only 2 years older than me, but unlike his siblings, he'd always been decent to me. Not everyone gets handed a job at Dad's law firm. Hey, I earned my position, Mark shot back, but his defensive tone suggested otherwise, unlike some people who think they can just craft their way to success. Speaking of success, my cousin Bryce chimed, in joining the conversation with his usual swagger. Did you guys hear about my new BMW? Just picked it up yesterday. Fully loaded, leather seats, premium sound system, the works. He jangled his keys for emphasis, making sure everyone could see the BMW logo. That's amazing, honey, Aunt Linda cooed, wrapping her arm around Bryce's shoulders. You've worked so hard for it. I bit my tongue. Bryce was 26 and had been working hard at his father's construction company for exactly 6 months. Before that, he'd spent 3 years traveling Europe on his parents' dime, finding himself. Sarah, what are you driving these days? Jessica asked with fake innocence. Still taking the subway everywhere? The laughter that followed felt like a physical blow. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the expensive hardwood floors and never face these people again. But something inside me, maybe it was my mother's voice, or maybe it was just stubborn pride, kept me standing. The subway is actually very efficient, I said, forcing a smile. Better for the environment, too. More laughter. Uncle Richard wiped, tears from his eyes. Oh, Sarah, you're adorable. Always trying to make the best of a bad situation. It's not a bad situation, I protested, but my voice cracked slightly. I'm building something. It takes time to... Build something? Mark interrupted. Sweetheart, You're 24 years old, living in a shoebox and selling crafts online. When are you going to grow up and get a real job?" "This is a real job," I said, my voice stronger now. "I've been studying market trends, developing relationships with suppliers, building a brand. I have a business plan, projected growth models." "Business plan!" Bryce slapped his knee. "Did you hear that, everyone? Sarah has a business plan." The room erupted in laughter again, and I felt my cheeks burning with shame and anger. These people, my own family, were treating my dreams like a joke. They saw my struggles, and instead of offering support or encouragement, they found entertainment in my failures. "You know what your problem is, Sarah?" Uncle Richard stood up from his chair, clearly enjoying his role as the family patriarch dispensing wisdom. "You're living in a fantasy. This isn't a movie where the underdog magically succeeds against all odds. This is real life. You need to accept your limitations and find yourself a nice, stable job with benefits. Maybe retail? I hear Target is hiring." The condescension in his voice was unbearable. Target. He was suggesting I work at Target like it was some kind of charity case solution to my pathetic existence. "There's nothing wrong with retail," I said through gritted teeth, "but that's not what I want to do with my life." "What you want doesn't always matter," Aunt Linda said, not unkindly but with the tone of someone explaining basic facts to a child. "Sometimes we have to be practical. Your mother, God rest her soul, was always a dreamer too. Look where it got her." The mention of my mother hit like a slap. My mom had died of cancer at 45, after spending her last years working 2 jobs, to pay for treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. She'd been a dreamer, yes, but she'd also been the strongest person I'd ever known. "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't bring my mother into this." "I'm not trying to hurt you, sweetheart," Linda continued. "I'm trying to help you see reality. Dreams are nice, but bills need to be paid. Food needs to be bought. You can't eat jewelry sales." "Actually," David interjected, "Sarah's jewelry is really beautiful. I bought a necklace from her shop for Emma's birthday, and she loved it." I shot him a grateful look, but Mark wasn't having it. "Of course you did, David. You've always been too nice for your own good. But buying a necklace out of pity isn't the same as running a real business." "It wasn't pity," David said firmly. "It was a quality product at a fair price." "Whatever helps." "You sleep at night," Jessica muttered, scrolling through her phone. "Oh my God, you guys have to see this vacation rental I found in the Hamptons. It's only $3,000 for the weekend. Should we split it for Memorial Day?" And just like that, the conversation moved on. I stood there, invisible again, while my cousins planned their expensive weekend getaway. $3,000 for a weekend. That was more than I made in 2 months. I excused myself to the bathroom and locked the door behind me. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what I was. A struggling young woman in an old dress, trying to hold on to dreams that everyone else thought were foolish. My reflection stared back at me with tired eyes and a forced smile that hadn't fooled anyone. But as I looked at myself, something shifted. Maybe it was the anger still burning in my chest. Or maybe it was the memory of my mother's voice telling me to never give up. But I made a decision in that moment. I wasn't going to let these people define me. I wasn't going to let their laughter and condescension crush my spirit. I pulled out my phone and opened my business banking app. The balance was pathetic, $347.82, but every penny of it was mine. I'd earned it by staying up until 3 a.m, sketching designs and sourcing materials. I'd earned it by learning photography to take better product shots, by teaching myself social media marketing, by writing and rewriting product descriptions until they sparkled. My Etsy shop had 847 sales in the past year. Not huge numbers, but each sale represented someone who'd seen value in my work. Someone who'd chosen to spend their hard-earned money on something I'd created with my own hands and imagination. I thought about my business plan, the real one, not the fantasy version my family imagined. I'd been researching wholesale opportunities, looking into pop-up markets, exploring partnerships with local boutiques. I had goals, timelines, strategies. It wasn't just a hobby or a pipe dream. It was a legitimate business with real potential. When I came back out, the party was in full swing. My cousins were comparing investment portfolios while their parents bragged about their latest home renovations. I stood at the edge of the group, listening to them talk about money like it was water, abundant and unlimited. "Sarah," Aunt Linda called out, her voice slightly slurred from wine. "Come here, dear. I want you to meet the Johnsons. They're our new neighbors." I walked over with a polite smile, preparing for another round of awkward introductions, where I'd have to explain my little craft business to people who would immediately categorize me as the family disappointment. "This is my niece Sarah," Linda said, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "She's creative. She makes jewelry." The way she said creative made it sound like a mental illness. Mrs. Johnson smiled politely. "How lovely. Is it just a hobby, or do you sell your pieces?" "She sells them online," Linda answered before I could speak. "It's sweet, really. Keeps her busy." Mr. Johnson nodded with the expression of someone receiving information about a child's lemonade stand. "That's nice. Everyone needs a creative outlet." I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull out my phone and show them my sales analytics, my customer reviews, my growth projections. I wanted to explain that I wasn't some bored housewife making friendship bracelets. I was an entrepreneur building something from nothing, but I didn't. I smiled and nodded and let them think whatever they wanted to think. Because in that moment, I realized something important. Their opinions of me didn't matter. Their lack of vision didn't diminish my dreams. Their inability to see potential didn't make my potential any less real. As the evening wore on, I found myself observing my family with new eyes. Mark was bragging about his salary at his father's law firm, but I knew he'd been passed over for promotion twice. Jessica was showing off her engagement ring and planning an elaborate wedding, but I'd overheard her fighting with her fiancé about money earlier. Bryce was talking about his business acumen, but his success was entirely dependent on family, connections. They weren't happy. They were comfortable, sure, but happiness and comfort weren't the same thing. They lived in constant comparison with each other, always needing to prove their worth through material possessions and status symbols. Their laughter at my expense wasn't coming from a place of joy. It was coming from insecurity and fear. Near the end of the party, David found me on the back patio, looking up at the stars. "You okay?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. "I've been better," I admitted. "But I've also been worse. They don't mean to be cruel," he said after a moment. "They just don't understand, don't they?" I turned to look at him, because it feels pretty intentional to me. David was quiet for a long moment. "You know, when I was in college, I wanted to be a teacher. Everyone laughed at that too. Said it was a waste of my potential, that I'd never make any real money. So I went to business school instead, got my MBA, joined the family firm. Do you regret it?" "Every single day." He gave me a sad smile. "But you're not going to make the same mistake I did, are you?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm not." "Good." He stood up and squeezed my shoulder. "For what it's worth, I believe in you. And I think your mom would be proud of how hard you're fighting." As I drove home in my ancient Honda Civic, the car my cousins loved to mock, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: determination. Pure, crystalline determination. I thought about my mother, who'd worked her fingers to the bone to give me opportunities she'd never had. I thought about all the late nights I'd spent learning about business, about marketing, about e-commerce. I thought about my designs, sitting in sketchbooks and on my computer, waiting to be brought to life. Most of all, I thought about the look on Mark's face when he'd called my business a joke. The smug satisfaction in Jessica's eyes when she'd asked about my car. The patronizing tone in Uncle Richard's voice when he'd suggested I apply at Target. They wanted me to give up. They wanted me to accept their version of my limitations and settle for whatever scraps of security I could find. But I wasn't going to do that. I was going to prove them all wrong. Not for revenge, though I'd be lying if I said the thought didn't appeal to me, but for something bigger, for my mother's memory, for my own self-respect, for every person who'd ever been told their dreams were too big for their circumstances. As I unlocked the door to my tiny apartment, I looked around with fresh eyes. Yes, it was small. Yes, it was shabby. But it was mine, and it was the launching pad for something extraordinary. I pulled out my laptop and opened my business plan. It was time to stop thinking small. It was time to stop letting other people's limitations become my own. It was time to turn my little jewelry business into something that would make my family's laughter stick in their throats. The girl they'd mocked tonight was about to disappear forever. In her place would rise someone they'd never seen coming, someone who would remember every slight, every condescending comment, every cruel laugh. I had work to do. 6 months after that humiliating birthday party, I was surviving on 4 hours of sleep and sheer willpower. My studio apartment had transformed into command central for what I'd started calling Operation Prove Them Wrong in my head. Every surface was covered with jewelry supplies, shipping boxes, photography equipment I'd bought secondhand, and printouts of market research. The numbers on my laptop screen made me want to cry. But this time, they were happy tears. My Etsy shop had exploded from 847 sales to over 3,200 sales in just 6 months. More importantly, I'd diversified. I now had accounts with 12 boutiques across New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. My Instagram following had grown from 200 to 15,000 followers, and the engagement was incredible. But the real game changer had happened 3 weeks ago. I was photographing a new collection, delicate gold-filled pieces inspired by Art Deco architecture, when my phone rang. Unknown number with a 212 area code. Is this Sarah Chen from Lumina Jewelry? The voice was crisp, professional, intimidating. Yes, this is Sarah. I set down my camera, heart pounding. This is Miranda Walsh from Walsh & Associates PR. I represent several high-end fashion brands, and I've been following your work on social media. I have a proposition for you. Miranda Walsh. I knew that name. She'd handled campaigns for some of the biggest names in fashion. What could she possibly want with me? I'm listening, I managed to say. One of my clients is launching a new lifestyle brand targeting millennial women. They're looking for an exclusive jewelry partner, someone fresh, authentic, with a compelling story. Your aesthetic aligns perfectly with their vision, and frankly, your background adds the kind of authenticity they can't manufacture. My background. She meant being poor, struggling, the underdog story. What would this partnership involve? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. An initial order of 5,000 pieces across 8 designs. Exclusive distribution through their channels, which include Nordstrom, Bloomingdale's, and their own flagship stores. The order value would be $380,000. I nearly dropped the phone. $380,000. That was more money than I'd made in my entire life combined. There's just one catch, Miranda continued. They need the pieces delivered in 8 weeks. It's an aggressive timeline for their fall launch, but if you can make it work, this could be life-changing for your business. 8 weeks. 5,000 pieces. I'd been making maybe 50 pieces a month working alone. I'll need to scale up production significantly, I said, my mind racing. But yes, I can make it work. Excellent. I'll send over the contract details today. Congratulations, Sarah. You're about to go big. After I hung up, I sat in my tiny apartment staring at the wall for 30 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. This was it. This was the break I'd been working toward, dreaming about, grinding for through every 18-hour day and every sleepless night. But it was also terrifying. 5,000 pieces meant I couldn't do this alone anymore. I needed help, equipment, space. I needed to become a real business, not just a one-woman operation running out of a studio apartment. I called David that night. "Holy shit, Sarah!" he practically shouted into the phone after I told him the news. "This is incredible! How are you going to manage production?" "I have no idea," I admitted. "I need to find a workspace, hire people, buy equipment. I need to figure out manufacturing at scale without compromising quality. I need to—" "Breathe," David interrupted. "One step at a time. Do you have the capital to scale up?" I'd been saving every penny for months, living on ramen and determination. Between my business account and personal savings, I had about $47,000. It wasn't nearly enough. "I'll need a loan," I said. "A big one." "What about family? I could talk to Dad, see if—" "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. "I'm not going to them. Not after how they treated me." David was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, I get it. But pride is expensive. If they could help—" "It's not about pride, David. It's about proving that I could do this without them. That all their laughter and condescension was wrong. If I go to them now asking for money, they'll say I was foolish to think I could make it on my own. But you did make it on your own. This opportunity came because of your talent and hard work. I know. But they won't see it that way." Instead, I spent the next week meeting with banks, credit unions, and small business lenders. The rejections were brutal. Too new. Too risky. Insufficient collateral. No established credit history. Finally, a small business development center connected me with a lender who specialized in working with minority and women-owned businesses. The interest rate was higher than I wanted, but after reviewing my sales records, growth projections, and the contract with Miranda's client, they approved me for a $200,000 line of credit. I signed those papers with shaking hands, fully aware that I was betting everything on my ability to deliver. If I failed, I wouldn't just be broke, I'd be buried in debt. But failure wasn't an option. I found a small warehouse space in Long Island City, Queens. It was raw, industrial, a little rough around the edges, perfect for my budget and my needs. The rent was $3,200 a month, which felt astronomical compared to my $100 studio apartment, but it came with loading dock access and enough space to set up multiple workstations. Hiring was the next challenge. I needed skilled jewelry makers, but I couldn't afford experienced artisans. Instead, I found art students, recent graduates, people with steady hands and creative minds who were willing to learn. I hired 5 people to start. Maria, who had a degree in metalworking but was working at a coffee shop. James, a former watch repair technician looking for more creative work. Priya, who'd been making jewelry as a hobby while working in finance. Alex, fresh out of art school with crushing student loans. And Carmen, a single mom with incredible attention to detail who needed flexible hours. I couldn't pay them much, $18 an hour to start, with the promise of raises as the business grew. But I offered something most employers didn't: the chance to be part of building something from the ground up. The first week in our new space was chaos. None of us really knew what we were doing at this scale. I was trying to manage production while also handling design, quality control, customer service, shipping, accounting, and marketing. I was working 20-hour days and sleeping on an air mattress in the corner of the warehouse. "This is insane," Maria said one evening, looking up from the workbench where she was setting stones. "You can't keep this pace up." "I don't have a choice," I replied, not looking up from the inventory spreadsheet I was updating. "We have 6 weeks left and we're behind schedule." "You do have a choice," James chimed in. "You could delegate. Trust us to handle more of the day-to-day stuff, while you focus on the big picture." He was right, but letting go of control was terrifying. This was my baby, my dream, my everything. What if they made mistakes? What if the quality suffered? What if I mess up your big opportunity? Carmen asked softly, reading my mind. "Sarah, we all believe in what you're building here. We want this, to succeed as much as you do. But you hired us for a reason. Let us help you. That night, I created delegation systems. Maria became my head of production, managing the workflow and quality control. James took over inventory and supplier relationships. Priya handled customer service and order fulfillment. Alex managed our social media and marketing content. Carmen became my operations manager, keeping everything running smoothly. It was still chaos, but it was organized chaos. 3 weeks into production, disaster struck. Our main supplier in Rhode Island had a factory fire, destroying not only our current order but also the molds we'd paid to have custom made. We were looking at a 6-week delay minimum, which would make it impossible to meet our deadline. I sat in my car outside the warehouse, crying from exhaustion and stress. Everything I'd worked for was falling apart. The contract with Miranda's. Client had strict delivery deadlines. If we missed them, we'd lose the entire order and I'd be stuck with thousands of pieces I couldn't sell, plus a crushing debt load. My phone rang. Jessica. Hey, Sarah. I heard through the grapevine that you're working on some big project. That's so cute. Mark was just saying how proud the family is that you're still pursuing your little hobby business. Very inspiring. The condescension in her voice was like nails on a chalkboard, but something about it also sparked a fire in my chest. It's not a hobby, Jessica. It's a business, a real one. Of course it is, sweetie. I didn't mean anything by it. We're all just glad you're keeping busy. Oh, by the way, did you hear about Bryce's promotion? He's going to be making 6 figures now. Daddy is so proud. 6 figures. Bryce, who'd never worked a day he didn't have to, who'd been handed every opportunity on a silver platter, was making 6 figures while I was drowning in debt and impossible deadlines. But as I sat there, listening to Jessica's voice drone on, about family achievements I wasn't part of, something clicked. I wasn't doing this for them anymore. I wasn't trying to prove them wrong just to spite them. I was doing this because I believed in what I was building. I believed in my team, my designs, my vision. I hung up on Jessica mid-sentence and called. My supplier in China, a contact I'd been cultivating for months but hadn't used because of the longer lead times. Their quality was excellent, their prices were competitive, and they could turn around my order in 3 weeks if I paid for expedited shipping. It would eat into my profit margins significantly, but it would save the contract. Mr. Wong? This is Sarah Chen from Lumina Jewelry. I need to discuss a rush order. The next 3 weeks were a blur of 18-hour days, quality control checks, shipping logistics, and pure determination. My team rallied around the crisis like nothing I'd ever seen. Maria worked extra shifts without complaint. James coordinated directly with our Chinese suppliers, staying up until 3 a.m. for calls during their business hours. Priya handled increasingly frantic calls from Miranda's team about delivery schedules. Alex created content showing our behind-the-scenes process, which actually boosted our social media engagement. Carmen kept us all fed, caffeinated, and motivated. We delivered 4,947 pieces on time. Not quite the full 5,000, but close enough that Miranda's client accepted the order without penalties. The day the final shipment went out, I stood in our warehouse looking at my exhausted but triumphant team. We'd done it. We'd taken a nearly impossible challenge and made it work through pure determination and teamwork. So, Maria said, cracking open a beer someone had brought to celebrate. What's next? I pulled out my phone and showed them the email that had come in that morning. 3 more brands wanted to place orders. A boutique chain in California was interested in carrying our line. A fashion blogger with 2 million followers wanted to feature us in her holiday gift guide. What's next? I said, grinning. Is that we're just getting started. That night, I moved out of my studio apartment and into a real 1-bedroom place 10 minutes from the warehouse. Nothing fancy. I was still watching every penny, but it had a proper bed, a kitchen table, and windows that looked out onto something other than a brick wall. As I unpacked my few belongings, I thought about my family. They had no idea what I'd been doing for the past 6 months. No idea that their failure niece and cousin had just completed a 6-figure contract. No idea that what they'd dismissed as a craft hobby was becoming a legitimate business with employees, contracts, and growth potential. Part of me wanted to call them, to share the news, to see the surprise in their voices. But I wasn't ready yet. This was just the beginning. I had bigger plans, bigger dreams, bigger goals. I wanted to wait until there was no doubt, no room for them to minimize or dismiss what I'd accomplished. I wanted to wait until the success was so undeniable that even they would have to respect it. I was learning that success wasn't just about the money or the recognition. It was about the quiet satisfaction of knowing you'd bet on yourself and won. It was about the loyalty and dedication of people who believed in your vision. It was about turning rejection and mockery into fuel for achievement. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Heard from Dad that you moved to a new place. Everything okay? Haven't heard from you in weeks. I typed back. Everything's great. Just been busy with work. I'll call you soon. Have some exciting news to share. Can't wait to hear it. Proud of you for following your dreams. Following my dreams. Such a simple phrase, but it carried so much weight. For so long, my dreams had felt like fantasies, like childish wishes that practical adults were supposed to outgrow. But now, they were becoming reality, one small victory at a time. I looked around my new apartment, humble but mine, earned through my own work and determination. Tomorrow I'd be back at the warehouse, working with my team to fulfill the new orders that were coming in. We'd face new challenges, solve new problems, celebrate new victories. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel proud. Proud of how far I'd come. Proud of what I'd built. Proud of the person I was becoming. The girl my family had laughed at was disappearing, replaced by someone stronger, smarter, more determined. Someone who turned obstacles into opportunities and mockery into motivation. Someone they were going to have to reckon with very soon. 18 months later, I stood in the corner office of our new headquarters in Soho, watching the controlled chaos of a company that had grown beyond my wildest expectations. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see our retail store, on the ground floor, where customers were browsing displays of jewelry that had been featured in Vogue, Elle, and Harper's Bazaar. Lumina Jewelry now employed 43 people across design, production, marketing, retail, and administration. Our annual revenue had hit $3.2 million, and we were on track to double that in the coming year. We had distribution deals with major department stores, a thriving e-commerce platform, and a waiting list for custom pieces that stretched 3 months out. But the real validation had come 6 months ago, when Forbes featured me in their 30 under 30 list for retail and e-commerce. The article called me a visionary entrepreneur who built a multi-million-dollar jewelry empire from a studio apartment in Queens. They interviewed me about my business philosophy, my design inspiration, and my plans for expansion. They didn't know about my family, about the birthday party where I'd been humiliated, about the years of condescending comments and cruel laughter. That wasn't part of the public story. That was private fuel that had driven me to this moment. Sarah? My assistant, Rachel, appeared in the doorway with a tablet in her hands. The Goldman Sachs team is here for the 3 o'clock meeting. Goldman Sachs. Even saying the name felt surreal. They were here to discuss investment opportunities, potential acquisition offers, and growth strategies that involved numbers I still sometimes couldn't quite believe were real. Send them to conference room A, I said, straightening my blazer. I'll be right there. The blazer was Armani, tailored specifically for me by a seamstress in the garment district. Underneath it, I wore a necklace from my own latest collection, a delicate chain with a pendant that looked like architectural scaffolding, inspired by the buildings going up around our neighborhood. Everything about my appearance screamed success, but in an understated, elegant way. I'd learned that true wealth whispers while insecurity shouts. The meeting with Goldman Sachs went better than expected. They were interested in helping us scale internationally, potentially opening up European and Asian markets. The numbers they were throwing around, $15 million in Series A funding, $50 million valuation, were almost abstract. I nodded and asked intelligent questions, while part of my mind wandered back to that eviction notice I'd stared at in my studio apartment just 2.5 years ago. After they left, I sat in my office reviewing the preliminary terms they'd outlined. My phone rang. David. Sarah. Jesus, I just saw the Forbes article. Why didn't you tell me you were featured in fucking Forbes? I laughed. It was good to hear his voice. We'd kept in touch over the past year, but I'd been deliberately vague about the scale of what I was building. Some combination of superstition and self-protection. I didn't want to jinx it, and I wasn't ready for family drama to contaminate my success. It just came out today, I said. I wasn't sure they'd actually run it. Not sure they'd run it? Sarah, this is huge. The article says you're projected to hit $10 million in revenue next year. $10 million. Do you know what this means? It means I've been working too much and sleeping too little for 2.5 years. It means you're rich, David said bluntly. Like, actually rich. Not just comfortable. Rich. He was right, though I tried not to think about it in those terms. The money was a byproduct of building something I believed in, of creating beautiful pieces that made people feel confident and special. But yes, the financial reality was that I was now worth more on paper than most people my age would see in a lifetime. The family's going to lose their minds when they find out, David continued. Have you told them yet? No, I said simply. Sarah, you can't keep this secret forever. Mom's going to find out. Someone's going to see the article or Google your name. And when she does, what? She's going to suddenly be proud of me? She's going to apologize for all the times she told me to get a real job? David was quiet for a moment. Maybe. People change when they realize they were wrong. Do they? Or do they just change their tune when there's something in it for them? As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had tagged me on Instagram. I opened the app and felt my stomach drop. It was Jessica, posting a screenshot of the Forbes article with the caption, "So proud of my brilliant cousin, Sarah Lumina Jewelry. We always knew she was destined for greatness. Your family first was entrepreneur life, your proud cousin." The comments were already pouring in. Friends congratulating her on having such a successful cousin. People asking if she could get them discounts on my jewelry. Jessica responding with heart eye emojis and "she's amazing" replies. I scrolled to her profile. She'd posted 3 more stories about me in the past hour, including a throwback photo from that birthday party 2 years ago with the caption, "Even then, we could see the CEO potential. Love this girl." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. This was the same person who'd mocked my craft business and suggested I needed a GoFundMe. Now she was claiming she'd always known I was destined for greatness. My phone started ringing. Mark. Let it go to voicemail, then immediately played it back. Sarah. Holy shit, cousin. Just saw the Forbes thing. This is incredible. Listen, I hope you know how proud the whole family is of you. We always believed in what you were doing, even when it seemed, well, you know how families can be, right? Just teasing. Anyway, call me back. I have some ideas about expansion that might interest you. There could be some real synergy between your business and what we're doing at the firm. Talk soon. I deleted the message and set my phone to Do Not Disturb. Over the next 3 days, the calls and messages multiplied exponentially. Aunt Linda left a voicemail saying she'd always been my biggest supporter and wanted to take me to lunch to catch up. Bryce sent a text congratulating me and mentioning that he had some capital looking for investment opportunities if I was interested. Even Uncle Richard, who'd suggested I apply at Target, left a rambling message about how he'd always seen potential in me and wanted to discuss family business opportunities. But it was Jessica's behavior that really got under my skin. She'd essentially appointed herself as my unofficial spokesperson on social media, posting daily updates about her successful entrepreneur cousin and responding to comments as if she were my business partner. She'd even started following and commenting on Lumina Jewelry's official accounts, leaving messages like "so proud to be family" on every post. I was in the middle of a production meeting when Rachel knocked on the conference room door. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, looking flustered. "But there's a woman here claiming to be your aunt? Linda something? She doesn't have an appointment, but she's insisting that you'll want to see her." My stomach dropped. "Tell her I'm in meetings all day, and to please make an appointment for next week." I tried that. She says she'll wait. Of course she would. I wrapped up the meeting as quickly as possible and walked to the reception area. There was Aunt Linda, dressed in her best suburban mom outfit, admiring the jewelry displays and chatting with our receptionist about how proud the family is. "Sarah!" she exclaimed when she saw me, arms outstretched for a hug. "Look at this place. It's absolutely stunning." I accepted the hug stiffly. "Hi, Aunt Linda. This is a surprise." "I was in the city shopping with the girls and I just had to stop by and see what you've built here. I hope you don't mind me dropping in unannounced." She'd never dropped in unannounced when I was struggling. She'd never been in the city shopping near my studio apartment in Queens. "It's fine," I said. "Would you like a quick tour?" I showed her around the showroom, watching her eyes widen at the price tags and the elegant displays. She kept making comments about how sophisticated everything looked, how professional the operation was, how she always knew I had it in me. "You know," she said as we walked through the design studio, "I was just telling Richard the other day how we should have invested in your business early on. We could have been part of this incredible journey." There it was. Not even 10 minutes in, and she was already talking about investment. "Actually," I said carefully, "you did have the opportunity to invest early on. I asked you for a small loan 2 years ago, remember?" Linda's cheeks flushed slightly. "Oh, honey, that was different. That was just... we couldn't have known then that it would become all this. You were just starting out, selling on Etsy. This is a real business empire." "It was a real business. Then too," I said quietly. "Just smaller." Of course it was. I didn't mean... What I meant was, now we can see the full scope of your vision. Now we understand what you were building toward. We finished the tour in my office, where Linda settled into one of the chairs across from my desk and got to the real point of her visit. "Sarah, I want you to know how incredibly proud the whole family is of what you've accomplished. We're telling everyone we know about our successful entrepreneur niece. You've really put the family on the map." "I appreciate that," I said, though her phrasing, "putting the family on the map," irritated me, as if my success was somehow a family achievement rather than something I'd built despite their lack of support. "Now, I hope you won't think I'm being presumptuous," Linda continued, "but Richard and I have been talking, and we'd love to explore ways we might be able to help you expand even further. Richard has connections in the legal world, obviously, and we have some capital we've been looking to invest in promising ventures." "What kind of capital are we talking about?" "Well, we'd have to run the numbers, but potentially somewhere in the range of $200,000 to $300,000. Maybe more, depending on the terms. $200,000 to $300,000. It was a decent amount of money, but nothing compared to what Goldman Sachs was offering. More importantly, it was money that came with strings attached, family strings, which were the most complicated kind. "That's generous," I said diplomatically, "but I should mention that I'm currently in discussions with some institutional investors about much larger funding rounds." Linda's eyes lit up. "How much larger?" "Significantly larger." "That's wonderful. But you know, there's something to be said for keeping things in the family. When you work with family, you know you can trust them. You know they have your best interests at heart." I almost laughed. Trust. from the woman who'd shared my private financial struggles with the entire family for entertainment. From the people who'd spent years telling me my dreams were unrealistic. "I'll certainly keep that in mind," I said. "But I should probably get back to work. I have a call with our European distributors in 20 minutes. "European distributors?" Linda beamed. "That's fantastic. You know, I studied abroad in France in college. I still have some connections there that might be useful." Everyone suddenly had connections that might be useful. After Linda left, I sat in my office trying to process the conversation. Part of me had hoped, foolishly maybe, that when my family finally acknowledged my success, there would be some recognition of how they'd treated me before. Some acknowledgement that they'd been wrong to dismiss and belittle my efforts. Instead, they were rewriting history. They'd always believed in me. They'd always seen potential. They'd been proud all along. The birthday party where they'd laughed at my business plan. Just family teasing. The suggestions that I get a job at Target. Loving concern for my financial stability. It was gaslighting disguised as support, and it made me angrier than outright hostility would have. Over the next 2 weeks, the family outreach intensified. Mark called to discuss synergies between my jewelry business and his law firm's corporate clients. Bryce sent an email with a detailed investment proposal that would give him a 15% stake in the company in exchange for $500,000 and his business expertise. Even some of the extended family members I barely knew started reaching out with congratulations and not-so-subtle hints about business opportunities. The most galling was Jessica, who'd apparently told her friends that she was helping with marketing for my company. When I found out, through a mutual acquaintance who asked me about it, I called her directly. "Oh, that." Jessica laughed when I confronted her. "I didn't say I worked for you or anything. I just mentioned that I'd been giving you some social media advice." "Which I have. Remember when I told you to use more hashtags?" "Jessica, you've never given me social media advice. And even if you had, telling people you're helping with my marketing implies a professional relationship that doesn't exist." God. Sarah, you've gotten so serious since you got successful. Can't family support family without making it a federal case? Support? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. "Jessica, 2 years ago you were making fun of my craft business and suggesting people start a GoFundMe for me. That's not support. That was just joking around. You know I never meant anything by it. Besides, that was when your business was tiny. Now it's real." There it was again. The implication that my business hadn't been real when it was small, when I needed actual support, rather than retroactive recognition. I decided it was time to set some boundaries. The opportunity came when Aunt Linda called to invite me to Mark's birthday party, a lavish affair at an upscale restaurant in Manhattan. "It'll be the perfect opportunity to celebrate as a family," she said. "Everyone's so excited to see you and hear about all your success." "I appreciate the invitation," I said, "but I'm not sure I can make it. We're in the middle of a major product launch. Oh, come on. You can spare one evening for family. Besides, Mark specifically asked me to make sure you came. He's hoping you two can talk business." Of course he was. But then I thought about it differently. Maybe it was time to face them all at once, to set the record straight about our history and my expectations going forward. Maybe it was time to stop avoiding the confrontation and address it head-on. "Actually," I said, "I think I can rearrange my schedule. Count me in." "Wonderful. I'll let everyone know you're coming. They'll be so thrilled." I spent the week before the party thinking about what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. I wasn't going to be cruel or vindictive, but I also wasn't going to pretend that the past hadn't happened. I'd worked too hard and come too far to let them rewrite history for their own comfort. The night before the party, I had dinner with David at a small Italian place near my apartment. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked after I'd explained my plan. These kinds of confrontations can get ugly fast. "I'm not planning to confront anyone," I said. "I'm just planning to be honest. If they can't handle honesty, That's their problem. Just remember that they're still family. Even if they've behaved badly, they're not evil people. They're just limited. David was probably right, but their limitations had cost me years of self-doubt and financial struggle. Their mockery had made some of the hardest times in my life even harder. Being family didn't give them a free pass for that. I know, I said, but being family doesn't mean I have to pretend the past didn't happen. And it definitely doesn't mean I owe them a piece of what I've built. The next evening, I stood outside the restaurant Mark had chosen for his party, an expensive steakhouse in Midtown that screamed, "Look how successful I am." I was wearing a simple black dress that cost more than my rent used to be, paired with a necklace from my signature collection. I looked successful without being flashy, confident without being arrogant. I was ready. The moment I walked into the private dining room, I could feel the shift in energy. These were the same people who'd attended Aunt Linda's birthday party 2 years ago, but their expressions were completely different now. Instead of smirks and barely concealed condescension, I saw excitement, calculation, and something that looked almost like reverence. "Sarah!" Mark practically leaped from his chair, arms outstretched. "The woman of the hour. Come here, birthday boy needs a hug from his successful cousin." The enthusiasm was so over the top it felt performative, like he'd rehearsed this moment. I accepted the hug, but kept it brief. "Happy birthday, Mark," I said, handing him a gift bag. Inside was a custom watch from a luxury brand I'd partnered with. Elegant, expensive, and completely impersonal. "You didn't have to get me anything. Having you here is gift enough." He peered into the bag and his eyes widened. "Holy shit, this is a Mont Blanc. Sarah, this must have cost—" "It's nothing," I said, which was both gracious and technically true. My connections in the luxury goods world meant I'd gotten it at cost, and what used to seem like a fortune to me was now just a tax-deductible business expense. As I made my way around the room, the reactions were predictably overwhelming. Jessica hugged me like we were long-lost best friends, and immediately started taking selfies for her Instagram. Bryce cornered me to discuss his investment proposal in more detail. Uncle Richard regaled me with stories about always knowing I'd be successful, but it was the little things that really revealed how much had changed. The way conversations stopped when I entered a group. The way people hung on my words when I spoke. The way they laughed a little too hard at my jokes, agreed a little too quickly with my opinions. I was no longer the family disappointment. I was the family success story, and everyone wanted to be associated with it. Dinner was an exercise in revisionist history. As we ate our overpriced steaks, family members took turns sharing memories of my entrepreneurial journey that bore no resemblance to reality. I remember when Sarah first told us about her jewelry business, Aunt Linda said, raising her wine glass. I turned to Richard and said, "That girl is going to be something special." "You were so supportive from the beginning," Jessica added, always encouraging her to follow her dreams. I sipped my wine and said nothing, watching them construct their alternate timeline where they'd been champions of my success rather than obstacles to it. And now, look at her. Mark gestured toward me with his fork. Featured in Forbes, running a multi-million-dollar company, employing dozens of people. It's incredible what vision and family support can accomplish. Family support. That was rich. "Actually," I said quietly, setting down my glass, "I'd like to address that." The table fell silent. All eyes turned to me. "I appreciate all the kind words tonight, I really do. But I think we need to be honest about what my journey actually looked like." The uncomfortable shifting began immediately. Glances were exchanged. Uncle Richard cleared his throat. "Sarah, honey, we don't need to relitigate the past," Aunt Linda said with a nervous laugh. "We're here to celebrate Mark's birthday and your success." "I'm not trying to relitigate anything," I replied calmly. "I just think it's important to acknowledge reality. Because the reality is that I built this business without family support. In fact, I built it despite active discouragement from most of you. The silence was deafening. Now wait just a minute, Uncle Richard started. Let me finish, please. My voice was steady but firm. 2 years ago, at your birthday party, Linda, I told this room about my business plan. I shared my dreams, my goals, my vision, and you laughed, not gentle teasing. You laughed at me. You called my business a hobby. You suggested I get a job at Target. You made jokes about starting a GoFundMe for me. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sarah, that was just family teasing, I interrupted. That's what everyone keeps saying. But when someone you're supposed to support tells you their dreams, and your response is mockery, that's not teasing. That's cruelty. Jessica set down her wineglass harder than necessary. You're being dramatic, Sarah. We were just worried about you. You were struggling financially, and we wanted you to be realistic. Realistic. I nodded slowly. You wanted me to be realistic. Like when I asked you for a small loan, Linda, to help with my electricity bill. $200. And you said, no, which was your right. But then you shared that private conversation with everyone here for entertainment. Linda's face flushed red. That wasn't... You did. Because the next time I saw Mark, he made jokes about my asking for money. So either he's psychic, or you told him. The table was quiet, except for the clink of glasses and the distant sound of other diners in the main restaurant. Look, I continued, I'm not telling you this to hurt you or to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because I need you to understand something important. I didn't succeed despite being poor. I succeeded because I was determined not to stay poor. Your lack of support didn't break me. It motivated me. We're proud of you now, Bryce said quietly. Isn't that what matters? I turned to look at him directly. Are you proud of me, Bryce? Or are you proud of what I represent? Because there's a difference. What do you mean? I mean, would you be sitting here trying to invest in my company if I was still making 50 pieces a month and selling them on Etsy? Would Jessica be posting about her brilliant entrepreneur cousin on Instagram if my business was still small? Would any of you be talking about family support and keeping things in the family if there wasn't money to be made? The question hung in the air like smoke. Mark set down his fork. Sarah, I think you're being unfair. Just because we didn't understand your vision initially doesn't mean we didn't care about you. Didn't understand my vision? I couldn't help but smile. Mark, I showed you a detailed business plan. Financial projections, market research, growth strategies. You didn't fail to understand it. You dismissed it without even looking at it properly. You called it crafts. You compared it to a lemonade stand. You told me to grow up and get a real job. I kept my voice level, stating facts rather than accusations. Those weren't the words of someone who didn't understand. Those were the words of someone who didn't respect me enough to take me seriously. Uncle Richard leaned forward, his face reddening. Now you listen here, young lady. No. The word came out sharper than I'd intended, and the entire table flinched. I'm not going to listen to another lecture about being realistic or practical or grateful. I've heard enough of those to last a lifetime. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, then turned the screen toward the table. The numbers displayed were staggering. My personal account balance, which didn't even include business assets or investments. This is what unrealistic looks like, I said. This is what happens when you ignore people who tell you to be practical and follow your own vision instead. The gasps around the table were audible. Jessica's mouth fell open. Bryce stared at the screen like he was trying to solve a math problem. Jesus Christ, Sarah, Mark whispered. Is that real? It's real. And it's mine. Every dollar earned through the business you called a joke. I put the phone away and looked around the table at their stunned faces. Now, I continued. I want to address something else. Over the past few weeks, several of you have approached me about investment opportunities, partnerships, and business ventures. You've talked about keeping things in the family and how we should work together. Nervous glances were exchanged again. I want to be very clear about this. I'm not interested. Not in your investments, not in your partnerships, not in your advice or connections or expertise. I've built something extraordinary without your help, and I'm going to continue growing it without your help. But Sarah, Linda said desperately, we're family. Family should support each other. You're absolutely right, I interrupted. Family should support each other. When I needed support, real support, not retroactive recognition, where were you? When I was eating ramen for dinner and sleeping, on a couch, worrying about eviction notices and utility shutoffs, where was the family support then? Silence. I'll tell you where it was. It was nowhere. It was laughter and condescension and suggestions that I get a job in retail. So don't talk to me about family support now that there's money on the table. David, who had been quietly eating his dinner through this entire exchange, finally spoke up. Sarah, I understand you're angry. I'm not angry, David. I turned to my cousin, the only one who'd ever shown me genuine kindness. I'm disappointed. Because even you, who was always decent to me, are sitting here letting them rewrite history. You know how they treated me. You were there. David looked down at his plate, unable to meet my eyes. But here's what I want you all to understand, I said, standing up from the table. I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need your acceptance, or your recognition, or your revised memories of being supportive. I needed those things when I was 24 and scared and struggling. I don't need them now. I reached into my purse and pulled out a check I'd written earlier that day. I placed it on the table in front of Aunt Linda. This is for the $200 I asked to borrow for my electricity bill, plus interest calculated at market rates, over 2 years. Consider it payment in full for any obligation I might have owed to this family. Linda stared at the check like it might explode. Sarah, I can't accept this. You don't owe me anything. You're right. I don't owe you anything. That's exactly my point. I gathered my purse and coat, preparing to leave. Wait, Jessica called out. You can't just... Where are you going? We're in the middle of dinner. I'm going back to my life, I said. The life I built without you. The life I'll continue building without you. Sarah, please. Mark stood up, his earlier bravado completely gone. Don't leave like this. We can work this out. We're family. I paused at the door and looked back. At the table full of people who shared my DNA but had never really been my family when it mattered. You know what's funny? I said. For years, I thought I needed to prove something to all of you. I thought if I could just be successful enough, impressive enough, wealthy enough, you'd finally see me as worthwhile. You'd finally treat me with respect. I shook my head, smiling sadly. But I was wrong. I don't need to prove anything to you. I already proved everything to myself, and that's the only opinion that matters. As I walked toward the exit, Uncle Richard called out one last time. You'll regret this, Sarah. Family is all we have in the end. I stopped and turned back to face him. You're absolutely right, Uncle Richard. Family is all we have in the end. But family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up for you when life gets hard. It's about who believes in your dreams even when they seem impossible. It's about who supports you not because of what you can do for them, but because of who you are. I gestured toward the table where they all sat, looking smaller somehow than they had when I'd arrived. You had the chance to be that kind of family, to me, and you chose not to. That's on you, not me. I walked out of the restaurant and into the cool New York evening, feeling lighter than I had in months. My phone started buzzing immediately. Calls and texts from various family members trying to smooth things over, to explain, to negotiate. I turned it off, Instead, I walked the 30 blocks back to my apartment, breathing in the city air and processing what had just happened. I'd finally said everything I'd been holding inside for years. I'd stood up for myself in a way I never had before. I'd drawn clear boundaries and stuck to them. It felt incredible. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of the expensive wine I kept for special occasions and called Maria, my head of production. "Sarah? Is everything okay? It's kinda late." "Everything's perfect," I said. "I just wanted to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "For believing in what we were building when it was just an idea. For working 18-hour days to help make it real. For being the kind of colleague and friend I could count on when everything felt impossible." "That's what teams do," Maria said, but I could hear the smile in her voice. "We've got something special here, Sarah. We all know it." "We do. And Maria, that expansion plan we've been discussing for the West Coast? Let's accelerate the timeline. I want to open our LA showroom by the end of the year." "Seriously? That's ambitious, but yeah, I think we can make it work. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of growth?" I looked around my apartment, the apartment I'd earned, filled with furniture I'd chosen, in a building I could afford, without worry. I thought about my team, my customers, my designs that were being worn by women around the world. I thought about all the dreams I'd made real through sheer determination and refusal to accept other people's limitations. "I'm ready," I said. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. After I hung up, I sat by my window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, in a restaurant in Midtown, my family was probably still sitting around that table, trying to process what had just happened. Maybe they were angry. Maybe they were confused. Maybe they were finally understanding the impact of their choices. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd built something extraordinary from nothing. I'd turned rejection into motivation, mockery into determination, and failure into fuel. I'd surrounded myself with people who believed in my vision and worked alongside me to make it real. I'd created my own family, one based on mutual respect, shared goals, and genuine support. One that celebrated successes and weathered failures together. One that saw potential instead of limitations. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "I'm sorry. You were right about everything, and I should have said so. I'm proud of who you've become, not just what you've accomplished." I smiled and typed back, "Thank you. That means more to me than you know." A few minutes later, another text came through, this one from an unknown number. "This is Emma, David's girlfriend. I don't know if you remember me, but I wanted to say that what you did tonight was incredibly brave. David filled me in on the backstory, and I just wanted you to know that you have supporters, even in unexpected places." Then another, from Rachel, my assistant. "Just saw Jessica's Instagram posts about dinner drama. Whatever happened, I hope you're okay. See you Monday. We're going to crush this week." And finally, one from James, my former production team member who'd recently been promoted to operations manager. "Don't know what's going on, but if you need anything, we've got your back. Team Lumina rides together." I looked at my phone, at these messages from people who'd chosen to be in my life, who supported me not because of obligation, but because of genuine care and respect. This was my real family. This was what mattered. Tomorrow, I'd go back to work. I'd continue building the empire I'd started in a tiny apartment with nothing but determination and a sketch pad. I'd keep proving that success isn't about where you come from or who believes in you. It's about believing in yourself and refusing to accept anyone else's definition of what's possible. The girl who'd been laughed at for having big dreams was gone, replaced by a woman who'd made those dreams reality. A woman who'd learned that the best revenge wasn't cruelty. It was achievement. It was building something so undeniably successful that the people who doubted you had no choice but to respect it. But more than that, It was learning that you didn't need their respect to be successful. You didn't need their approval to be worthy. You didn't need their support to be unstoppable. You just needed to believe in yourself and be willing to do the work. I raised my glass to the city lights, to the dreams I'd chased, to the failures I'd overcome, and to the success I'd earned. Here's to proving them wrong, I said aloud. And here's to not needing to. The next morning, I woke up energized and focused. I had an empire to run, dreams to chase, and a future to build. The drama with my family was behind me now. A chapter closed so that new, better chapters could begin. As I walked into the office, I was greeted by my team's excited faces and a stack of new orders that had come in over the weekend. Goldman Sachs had sent over revised terms for their investment offer. A luxury hotel chain wanted to discuss a partnership for their spa retail stores. A celebrity stylist had requested custom pieces for an upcoming red carpet event. This was my life now. This was what I'd built from nothing, what I'd created through sheer force of will and refusal to accept limitations. And the best part? I was just getting started. 1 year later, I stood on the stage at the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Awards, holding a crystal trophy that represented everything I'd worked for. Lumina Jewelry had hit $12 million in annual revenue. We'd opened showrooms in Los Angeles, Miami, and Chicago. We'd launched an internationally successful online platform. We'd been featured in every major fashion magazine and had celebrity customers wearing our pieces to award shows and premieres. In the audience, I could see my real family: Maria, James, Rachel, David, and the team that had helped make all of this possible. They were on their feet, cheering, their faces glowing with genuine pride and joy. As I looked out at the crowd, I spotted a familiar face near the back. Jessica, trying to take a selfie with the stage in the background, probably for another Instagram post about her successful cousin. I smiled and looked away. Some people never change, and that's okay. Their limitations aren't mine to carry anymore. The presenter handed me the microphone for my acceptance speech. I looked out at the audience, at the entrepreneurs, investors, and business leaders who were gathered to celebrate innovation and success. 3 years ago, I began. I was living in a studio apartment in Queens, selling jewelry on Etsy, and wondering if I'd ever be able to afford rent. People told me to be realistic, to get a real job, to accept my limitations. I paused, letting that sink in. Tonight, I want to talk to anyone out there who's been told the same thing. Anyone who's been laughed at for dreaming big. Anyone who's been told they're not smart enough, rich enough, connected enough to succeed. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Here's what I learned. Success isn't about proving other people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's about believing in your vision, even when no one else can see it. It's about turning rejection into fuel and using mockery as motivation to work harder. I held up the trophy, letting the stage lights catch the crystal and send rainbows across the ceiling. This award isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who believed in something bigger than their circumstances. Everyone who chose to build something rather than accept limitations. Everyone who discovered that the only approval you really need is your own. The applause was thunderous, sustained, energizing. As I walked off the stage, I felt the same feeling I'd had that night in the restaurant when I'd finally stood up to my family. The feeling of being truly, completely free. Free from other people's expectations. Free from the need for external validation. Free to build whatever I could imagine and work hard enough to achieve. Free to be successful on my own terms. And that, I realized, was worth more than all the money in the world.